redo a constitution will be almost impossible because there were at that time only 350 million people. And today, you know the population.
Yeah. Bringing in something like Bharat, Nagrik, it's a mouthful. So I have to look down and read it every
No,
time.
that's all right.
Yeah.
You see, suppose we were conversing in Hindi, then this is perfectly all right. What should be our national language?
English is a foreign language?
No,
or
Indian, purely Indian.
Welcome to this edition of First Voice Last Word, Hindustan Times' main podcast on politics. And today we have a special guest, Fali Nariman, to talk about his latest book, Constitution. Now, as you know, in this season, we have focused on the road to 2024. And the reason why speaking to senior jurist Fali Nariman is because the Constitution has become a huge part of the conversation on the road to 2024, also one of the major issues. Thank you, sir, for speaking with us and Hindustan Times. I wanted to start by asking you, you've written a book about, and it's called Know Your Constitution. Why is
You must know
your Constitution. Why should people know the Constitution?
Well, that's your basic document of governance. So anybody who wants to know what is Parliament, how is the executive functioning, how is it to function, how are elections to be held, all that sort of stuff, which interests the public because the public are vitally concerned and we have adult franchise. So this is not a dictatorship. At least, I mean, there's no autocratic government. We profess to be a democratic government, and we are a democratic government, despite what people may say. Despite what people, there may be an occasional nonsensical thing that comes in, but that makes no difference. So this constitution was devised 75 years ago. It took a couple of 2 years and a few months and a few days in order to be finalized.
Yeah.
And ultimately it was finalized. And to redo a constitution will be almost impossible because there were at that time only 350 million people. And today, you know the population is at 4 times, 5 times. Yeah. And in fact, that's how the new parliament house has come up because it can't possibly accommodate people who should be accommodated because this is Lok Sabha is not for only 600 people but for 800, 900 representatives. So the whole concept is different. And that's why it's important for everybody to know something about the Constitution. You may not know everything about the Constitution. There are a lot of things. There are 25 different parts of the Constitution. But the more important parts are what should be known, like fundamental rights, the directive principles of state policy, and so on.
You know, I must say that I'm privileged to have this conversation with you, sir, because I've read your book. And I'm a lay person. I'm not a specialist in law. I'm very interested in the law.
Yeah, most people are lay person. Yeah, just as I am a lay person in medicine. Yeah, you are a lay person in medicine. So we don't expect you to be proficient.
But the thing is that your book is really interesting even for me. However, it's good to have this conversation to really see it all come alive. So I'm glad that, for everyone who's listening to this conversation, they'll actually get a very clear idea of some of these concepts which you write about in your book. Now, when you say that people should know about the Constitution, is there something which is a widespread misconception about the Constitution which actually spurred you to write this book? Because you're like, oh my God, don't people know our Constitution says this very clearly? And you can see this misconception in the general public?
Well, to take one instance, sedition. What is sedition? It has been defined, and it was defined in British times back in 1870. That is about more than 250 years ago. So, and it was defined as something where the citizen has to have an affection for his government. Some concept of that time. That why should you have affection for your government if that government is to be displaced in an election and another government comes in?
That's right.
Yeah, so there's no necessity. But you must realize that this was at a time when there was no India, there was only British India. So the British had this conception that in all the colonies, there would be this particular law, which is applied almost throughout the Commonwealth of Nations. Our Indian Penal Code has been followed by almost all the Commonwealth nations in the world. The Commonwealth, those who have this Westminster type constitution.
Sure, so Australia, Canada.
Yeah, Canada, right. And the smaller countries, you see. And therefore, the whole concept of sedition was that you must have affection for the British government. If you don't have affection, then you commit an offense.
Of sedition.
Of sedition.
Right.
Yeah, and you can be sent away for more than 20 years in jail. This is idiotic. But that's how the section is, right. And the section was. And the question, therefore, at one time was, is this constitutional? Does this meet with... you see, unfortunately, the Constitution itself made an exception in the draft Constitution that the law of sedition will remain.
Right.
Now, but that was deleted before the Constitution got finalized. So the assumption was that we have no laws of sedition. But that assumption, the Supreme Court said later that no, that's not quite correct. We do have a law of sedition. There is such a thing as affection, but it has to be, by affection is only meant that there should not be any outward sign of violence in order to the section to apply.
This was much later in the 60s.
Much later in the 60s, which again is being reconsidered at the moment by the Supreme Court. Yeah.
So by what you're saying, this concept of sedition, which has been brought in again in the new version of the
British concept, yeah.
It's a British concept, and so
and
by
that has been again been reintroduced in the new version, which is in that Sanskrit version of the IPC, which has come in.
Which is the Bharat Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita.
Quite right. Now, that could actually be really translated into the IPC. Let's not call it the penal code, because we don't like to think of Lord Macaulay and people like that, who were not very happy with Indians in British India.
That's right.
Yeah, so let's call it IPC or CRPC, which is the Criminal Procedure Code, so that people understand what it means. Just as you have the CPC, which means the Civil Procedure Code, which is purely Indian. It has nothing to do with Macaulay or anybody in Britain.
So you're saying that this whole exercise which is going on of ridding ourselves of what is considered colonial, that can simply be done by just, instead of saying Criminal Procedure Code, we can just say CRPC.
CRPC and IPC. IPC is the Indian Penal Code. That's what it's been known as for more than a century now. So I don't know why.
So bringing in something like Bharat Nagrik, it's a mouthful. So I have to look down and read it every time.
No, that's all right. Yeah. You see, suppose we were conversing in Hindi, then this is perfectly all right. That is why India, that is Bharat in the Constitution. There's no difficulty. So Bharat would be in Hindi, and correctly. And but 75 years ago, there was a question, and a very vexed question, in the Constituent Assembly consisting of more than 300 members.
Right.
Only 17 women, incidentally. Only 17. Yes. Just imagine. Yes. What progress is made since then.
Yes.
Anyway, that's how it is. So the problem that arose there was, what should be our national language in the Constituent Assembly? There was almost mayhem. People were totally opposed to Hindi in the Devanagari script, Hindi in some other script, and so on and so forth. And so there had to be a vacation taken for a few months.
Really? During the Constituent Assembly debates.
And the final version only came after all the other articles of the Constitution were
Would you like some water? One second.
Were taken into consideration and accepted. This almost came at the very end, last few months. So, and since we could not agree, it was known as the half-hearted compromise. No official language, but no national language, only two official languages, Hindi and English.
So English is a foreign language
No,
or
Indian, purely Indian.
English is an Indian language?
Indian language, yeah. If you want to spell it with an I, you are welcome. No difficulty.
So what do you make of, okay, so I think that is so according to our constitution, English is an Indian language.
Of course.
According to our constitution.
But I wish people would recognize that.
Yeah, I think, my
it
question...
is no longer the language of Englishman. It is no longer the language of Englishman.
I think this is the biggest, my question was right in the beginning of what is the misconception people have about the Constitution. I think this is one of the key ones.
Yes.
Because people think that English is a British legacy, but you're saying according to our Constitution, English is an Indian language.
You see, we could well have, in the beginning, have said, no English. Hindi is the national language. We did not pronounce upon what is the national language because there was a lot of difficulty about script, about languages, regional language, all sorts of things.
Right.
And there was a mayhem. It was impossible to arrive at a conclusion. In fact, it was one of the things on which the Constitution did not almost get drafted.
Wow.
Yeah, and finalized. That was the problem. Because we were all, in those days, we were all part of a British system of education.
Yes.
Where English was taught. So am I. I'm that product.
Yes.
I'm pretty ancient now, but I mean, that's how it is.
So, sir, when people, why is it, would you explain to us, because we need to understand what happened in the past to, make sense of what's happening now. Why is it that we did not, like you said, if they wanted, Constitution should have just had Hindi as the
perfectly all right. In fact, that would have been ideal.
But why was it not?
Because there was no agreement.
Right.
You had to have consensus. A constituent assembly drafting a constitution had to have consensus. There was no consensus. Because there were people from different walks of life who were all part of the constituent assembly. Although, I mean, there were about 20 or odd people who really were the voices in the Constituent Assembly. The rest were people who either agreed or disagreed, etc.
So, does that mean, sir, that there are some voices right now, especially right-wing voices, who are pointing out that we should, maybe this is one of the factors they point as the reason why the Constitution needs to be
You see, it's not a matter of translation. That is a misconception. It has nothing to do with translation. It has to do with concepts.
Right.
I mean, what do you call the Westminster type constitution? I mean, how would you describe it in any other language than English? That's the problem. Because it's an English concept. You have accepted that English concept, that British concept. So have 56 other countries in the world. They were all British colonies, part of the British Empire, which is now disbanded. But they have become the British Commonwealth. It's known as the British Commonwealth of Nations. Very, very wisely they have put it, with the Queen at the top, or the King now at the top, but having no control or no voice at all in the affairs of the country, because we are totally independent.
And why do you say that you can't rewrite the Constitution?
Beg your pardon? Oh, because you just imagine, you and I have different opinions on it. And what about there were only 350 million people at the time the Constitution was finalized. Today, there are 4 times that number in the population. And adult franchise, what do you do? How do you discern everybody's view? Each Indian today has 2 views on almost every topic.
So we the people would not be able to agree.
Exactly, we the people, it starts with we the people. I mean, whatever you want to call it in Hindi, by all means, certainly do that. But that has to be a constitution which is framed for the people. It's meant to be for the people. It wasn't by the people, certainly not, because it was a limited franchise that all these people were elected.
Yeah.
But now it is adult franchise. So it is unlimited franchise. Everybody has a vote. Whether you can read or write, whether you cannot, whether you are a scholar, whether you are not educated, makes no difference.
But humor me in this, sir. If they were to say that whatever a majority of the people, because we have a majority government.
Yes, everything has to be majority.
Yeah. So if the majority government comes up with a new draft of the constitution, that wouldn't work.
No, because it would have to be by a 2/3. You would have to frame a new constitution. This is not an amendment. You see, a new constitution would require a constituent assembly being called, which is inconceivable. I mean, how would you conceive it with 1,200 million people?
Yeah. One of the first things that you said, sir, is that the new parliament has to have new, because it has to increase, it has to have more representation, because we're a much larger country now. And so 545 MPs is perhaps not representative of the 1.4 billion people. There's a major debate, sir, about the fact that would mean states which are more populous, whether it's Bihar or Uttar Pradesh, they get greater representation. Whereas the southern states, which have been much more disciplined, they have controlled their population, and they are much more, efficient, they're doing well economically, that they have fewer representatives, and that way they would be punished by this whole exercise.
Yeah, that is so.
Then how do you solve that problem, sir?
That's a political solution. Not a legal solution. That's a political solution. That has to be resolved. That's by the vote. Now, how the vote falls, nobody knows how the vote will fall in 2024 or later in 2028. I mean, for that matter, every 4 years.
But that is purely a political.
That's purely political. And that's where all the political parties are at the moment fumbling and wondering what to do.
Yeah.
Because, they are all at sixes and sevens.
So it is a big quandary.
It's a big problem. And the larger the size of the country, the greater the problem, naturally.
Yes.
And particularly if you have people who have of different races, of different religions, etc. And we are a very religious country, whether you like it or not.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. It's in our marrow.
So, sir, speaking about size and population and rights of people, there's a big debate now on whether jitni abadi utni haq, the representation according to the numbers of people, which is why there's a huge thing about the caste census. I wondered if you had an opinion about that.
Oh, caste census, I don't know, because it's going to be even worse. It's going to be a greater splitting off, because there'll be greater reservations. And what happens to merit? I mean, these are all, they have to be balanced. You see, a constitution has to have a balance. There can't be a one-sided approach. Whichever the side, even the majority government, you can't have merely because a majority deciding what is to be done in that sense. It does go by a majority vote, whether you like it or not. But if some states are not majoritarian and they belong to some other group, then what happens in a federal country? We are supposed to be federal, which is not really, strictly speaking, correct. We are what is called a quasi-federal. That is half federal.
Why is that?
That is because that's because, you see, at the time when the Constitution was drafted, the basic impression of everybody was, and the goal of everybody was, that we must have unity. We must not sacrifice unity. Otherwise, we break up into, like India before the British came was broken up into all sorts of the Mughals, the Marathas, in the south, the Vijayanagara Empire, and so on. But that's not what we want. We don't want to be broken up. We want to be one country. We are now a big nation, enormous. I mean, we are doing pretty well. Our foreign policy is excellent. I have no quarrel with it. But the trouble with us is that we have little tolerance of other views. It is not only with the government, it's with the opposition as well. They are intolerant of the views of one section. We can't just see eye to eye. And therefore, thinking of another constitution is absolutely impossible. So we have to now make do, because since we have 75 years now and we have worked it, it's not that we haven't worked it. Please remember that we've had regularly elections from 1952, every time. And that's been the great, remarkable plaudit around the world. Amongst so many million people, now there will be 900 million. and in 2024 who are part of the electorate. That means the people who will elect their representatives. And that's an enormous number.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned it as well, India, that is Bharat. There's a little bit of a, it became a debate recently on, especially shedding the whole colonial baggage, that
Yes.
should we, which is the more Indian name? And
it is India. That's also the Indian name. Is but in English, if you write in English, it's India. If you want to write in Hindi, it is Bharat. I mean, it's absurd to write in English Bharat. I mean, it's in Hindi. So if you want to, have the whole language of the country official Hindi, by all means.
But can you do
that? Of course you can. But that will take a long time, and the South will protest. Yeah. And that's the problem. So we have to accommodate everybody. There has to be tolerance.
So do you think it's possible to change the name of our country?
Beg your pardon? Yes, of course it's possible.
How does one do that? It's through an amendment or a resolution?
Yeah, of course. Like names of cities are changed. Yeah. Bombay has become Mumbai, which it always was. Amongst Parsis, we always said Mumbai. But right. We always said Mumbai. We never said Bombay. But anyway, the official thing was Bombay because they couldn't have Mumbai. The British didn't think of Mumbai. They didn't enter their dictionary. Similarly, Madras. So you change these names.
So
but
by what?
Changing names doesn't change anything. You see, the trouble with we seem to think that changing names will give us some sort of extra point somewhere. No, it doesn't. It makes no difference. You change it or don't change it. Mm. Calcutta is no longer Calcutta. It's become Kolkata. So what difference? It's all right, but does that help? Anything that helps should be propagated, not something that's unnecessary. These are all unnecessary things.
So this wouldn't even require like an amendment or a change of law. It could just be a resolution.
Yes, that's right. Nothing. There's no difficulty at all.
Right. The other thing I wanted to just ask you is that, we were talking about the Constitution, and in your book, you write that the recent experiment that Chile had, that they all demanded it, they all talked about. Could you explain what happened over there and how it could apply to us?
No, what happened was that they said, of course, we must change this constitution because the Pinochet constitution they didn't accept.
Right.
And they said, no, we have to change it. Everybody agreed that it should be changed. But when it was changed, they all said, no, this is not the constitution we thought of. We should have some other constitution. Now, a country has to get on. Yeah. It doesn't have to keep framing constitutions. That's the least part of it. And there has to be some stability, something that's basic to governance. And something that's basic to governance is our constitution. Mm-hmm. That's why one should definitely know one's constitution. We have it's in so many parts, but that is because it adopted parts of the Government of India Act, the British Parliament's Government of India Act of 1935. That's why it is said to be of British origin. That's why some people call it colonial, etc. But these are all adjectives. It makes no difference. You call it colonial, you call it, you don't like it or you like it. This is something we have inherited. We have to now work it. The important thing is how do you work it? And working is by tolerance. And there's a very important thing in our preamble, which says not only liberty, equality, justice, but fraternity. Now, do you have fraternity? You ask yourself, let people ask themselves whether we fraternize, we should have fraternity.
And in our constitution, the whole thing of fraternity is people actually living together and sharing views.
Yes, as one nation.
And that's a problem.
And the whole idea was to have one nation, not to have several nations within one nation.
So what do you think legally speaking?
We were not like American states, which were totally independent because they were the 13 American colonies, which became, and they themselves have constitutions, just like Kashmir has a constitution. They also have constitution, the American state, independent constitutions, because they were totally independent. And they all came together.
So, what do you suggest in improving this whole concept of fraternity? is that something that can be done legally or just a political thing?
That depends on our nature. You see, that's why a spirit of tolerance, which is at a very low ebb throughout the world today, in India particularly, has to be cultivated. How to cultivate it is for the people who devise our education system. It's for them to devise some method by which it is to be cultivated. That we have to live together. We don't have to fight each other within the same country.
You mentioned the preamble. It always comes up now and then, the fact that secular socialists were added later on. Do you think that they are integral parts of the Constitution, sir?
They are, but you ask yourself, you see, because secular is quite right. We are secular. We are secular. We have to be secular, whether you like it or not. But the problem is that our religious base that we are is extraordinarily foundational. It's very, very difficult to get rid of our religious base. Each community within the country has a certain ethos, certain culture. That's why our constitution also has a thing called personal law.
Yes.
Personal law, which is recognized in our constitution. And that personal law has something to do with the personality of that community. Take us, we are the smallest minority in the country, the Parsis, but yet we have our personal law. And when, years ago, after independence, it was proposed that the Succession Act, which applied to the whole country, there was a special law for Parsi intestate succession. Intestate means dying without a will.
Right.
So, and the woman got only half the share of the man. If a father dies without leaving a will, his daughters will only get half the share of the sons, which is grossly unfair.
Yes.
So, a group of us at that time, this was years ago, went to the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, at that time she was there. And she said, yes, that's all very well, but are you all at one? Because if you are not at one, I'm not going to change your personal law. Your personal law is your own. Yeah, you have to stick with it.
And then?
So then, ultimately, after 4 or 5 years, it was resolved that, yes, this is disgraceful and we shouldn't have it. And it was changed at our request.
Because all the Parsi community came together.
Yeah, the Parsi community represented by the Bombay Parsi Panchayat, and which was the premier body in the country. And the law was changed. But that's only at the request of the community. Otherwise, it won't be changed. The personal law will remain your personal law.
So, sir, is that comparable to the triple talaq thing being changed?
Yes, absolutely.
It is.
They're all comparison. Yes, absolutely correct. Yeah.
It is.
These are all part of your personal law. They don't apply to other communities. Whatever doesn't apply, like in succession, in Mohammedan succession, law of succession is entirely different from the Hindu law of succession.
I guess, sir, that explains why UCC, you say, this is not the time.
Yeah.
In your book, you say that.
This is not the time. That's my view. I mean, of course, it's a good thing ultimately to have it. But the constitution framers were very wise, you see. They said that, yes, it is ideal. We must have it. But in due time. This is not enforceable, this uniform civil code. Because how will you frame it? It's only the Portuguese which have devised it. And that's very good because the Goanese still have it. They have a UCC of their own. The little Goa which is there has that, and they are perfectly all right. They live with it. They are able to manage our...
But across the country, it's very different.
Across the country.
Fali Nariman, thank you so much for speaking with us.
It's okay. Great.
Thank you,
sir.